All right, let's continue here. The next problem statement I'd like to highlight here this afternoon is the one where Ellen White said that eating pork could cause leprosy. This one is found in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 4A, page 146. In order to preserve health, temperance in all things is necessary. Temperance in labor, temperance in eating and drinking. Because of intemperance, a great amount of misery has been brought upon the human family. The eating of pork has produced scrofula, leprosy, and cancerous humors. Pork eating is still causing the most intense suffering to the human race. So, is there a connection between eating pork and leprosy? There is no known scientific research to support this idea. It's not there. It's not present. But there is a study that indicates that in some experiments with mice, rodents which were given a pork diet showed a significantly greater predisposition to leprosy than those of a non-pork diet. But that does not mean that they will get leprosy. They have more predisposed to getting leprosy. There is evidence that leprosy is contracted today by eating armadillo meat. So those of you in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, in 1983, in the USA, there were about 1,000 cases of leprosy, the Hansen's disease. The armadillo is 20 times more susceptible to Hansen's disease than humans. And it has been known that the infected armadillo meat will cause Hansen's disease. So there's no proof that what Ellen White said here regarding pork and leprosy, that there is a direct connection between the two. All that we know is that there is a predisposition that may be possible, and there is another kind of meat that does cause leprosy, but not that direct one. So, question mark on this one. Maybe time will prove some connection. There's really at the moment no proof of this one.
Wouldn't giving mice a meat diet cause them to become immunocompromised and thereby making them susceptible to many diseases?
Yes, the study though did the same thing with other meat, and that did not cause the problem. So it's the pork meat that seemed to be causing more of the difficulty there. But good point. I don't know what to answer to this one. So she does mention that, question mark, no proof to support it. Let's move on. Let's look at another one that I have no answers for. Regarding volcanoes and earthquakes, patriarchs and prophets. At this time, regarding the flood, immense forests were buried. These have since been changed into coal, forming the extensive coal beds that now exist and also yielding large quantities of oil. Now we do know that that is, geologically speaking, accurate. Coal and oil do come from the burying of vast amounts of forests in thousands of years ago. The coal and oil frequently ignite and burn beneath the surface of the earth. Thus rocks are heated, limestone is burned, and iron ore is melted. The action of the water upon the lime adds fury to the intense heat and causes earthquakes, volcanoes, and fiery issues. As the fire and water come in contact with ledges of rock and ore, there are heavy explosions on the ground, which sound like muffled thunder. The air is hot and suffocating. Volcanic eruptions follow. Now, this is where this one's a little complicated, is that geologically speaking, we do know that volcanoes and earthquakes do not come from the fact that oil or coal beds underground are burning. It's geologically, as far as we know, that's not possible. However, before 1850, many scientists believed that earthquakes and volcano eruptions were caused by earth underground such fires. Now the accepted theory is that it's lava and so on. Yet, again, in the time of Ellen White, a number of examples of burning coal beds had been found. People had found coal beds burning, and one of them had been burning in Germany for 150 years in the time of Ellen White. So where did she get this idea? She wants to try to explain the results of the flood, the burying of the forests that give oil and coal, and then she wants to connect it to volcanoes and earthquakes. She had heard, very likely, of some examples of burning coal beds in some places. Would that have been, what led her to try to support this comment with this indication here? Likely. Apart from that, not much of an answer we can provide here. This is complicated. Let me go on to two issues that are more difficult and raise a whole lot more heat and discussion. The first one has to do with the amalgamation of man and beast. This is likely, of all the problem statements of Ellen White, this one is the problem one. Of all of them, this one here is the troublesome one is this one. So let's take some good time to deal with this one. I'm quoting 3 sentences from Ellen White. It appears only 3 times in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, and then repeated almost verbatim in Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1. Here she says, "If there were one sin worse than another before Noah's flood, it was the base crime of amalgamation of man and beast. It defaced the image of God in mankind and caused confusion everywhere." Let me pause there. That chapter in Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, is a chapter on the conditions, the moral conditions before the flood. She's trying to explain why is God sending a flood to the earth to destroy the earth. And so she lists a number of moral sins. She starts with, not in the right order, here I'm quoting from memory, but she talks about polytheism. She talks about polygamy. She talks about murder and free will murder, just killing for the pleasure of killing. And she talks about sacrifices. She talks about building huge houses, so materialism. And at the end of that list, the last sin she mentions is this one. So she's talking about big sins here. And then she talks this one. The base crime of amalgamation of man and beast. It defaced the image of God in mankind and caused confusion everywhere. The next chapter, she goes on to talk about after the flood. One of the purposes of the flood, she says, was to destroy these confused species which were not a part of the original creation by God. That seems to indicate here that there's been amalgamation of man and beast. Out of this, some confused species have been created or originated, and that's one of the reasons to destroy the earth. Okay? And then one more sentence. If we were to stop there, it would be fine. No problem. The next sentence is the problem sentence. Since the flood, there has been amalgamation of man and beast, as may be seen in the almost endless variety of species of animals, and here it is, and in certain races of men. Now, she's not talking about before the flood, because there everything has been wiped out. She's talking about since the flood. All right? That's where the problem is. Now, a lot of questions need to be asked here, and a lot of trying to wrestle with what's going on here. So let's try to understand. Although these statements were reprinted in her Spirit of Prophecy series, Volume 1 in 1870, It's interesting and significant to note that Ellen White did not perpetuate this curious expression in her later expansion on the flood narrative in Patriarchs and Prophets in 1890. It would be good to know why. She does not tell us why. But Patriarchs and Prophets, that chapter on the flood, follows the same pattern, the same basic outline. Talks about these basic sins, skips this idea. That paragraph is erased. Then she continues, after the flood, the same thing goes, but skips those two sentences and then goes on. So any references, the three references to amalgamation of men and beasts are withdrawn in the text in Patriarchs and Prophets. What is she trying to do here? Why is she pulling them out? Why is she not putting them in? In 1947, so that goes back a long time here. So just to let you know here that this discussion is nothing new. In 1947, a debate was held between Dr. Harold Clark of the biology department at PUC and Dr. Frank Lewis Marsh, a longtime biology teacher at Union College. And that debate took place in September of 1947 near San Francisco in California. And the debate was, what was she trying to say regarding amalgamation of man and beast? Dr. Clark said that the position that Ellen White meant amalgamation between men and animals, with offspring being born as a product of this union. Monsters, in other words, were born out of copulation between human beings and animals having sex together. And these monsters were born out of it. That's what Dr. Clark's opinion is. Dr. Marsh said, no, that's not it. What Ellen White was trying to say was that she was trying to say that spiritual man and wicked man, or people, we should say, spiritual people and wicked people were copulating together, amalgamating their races together, and that animals and animals were amalgamating themselves together. So these are the two opinions, and today the same two opinions still prevail. They are the basic two interpretations to what is trying to be said here by Ellen White. Elder Francis Nichol, in his book Ellen G. White and Her Critics, spends about 15 pages trying to explain what Ellen White is saying here. And he observes, he takes the grammatical, he takes Dr. Marsh's approach to the issue. That Ellen White meant by amalgamation of beast is what is missing here is the second preposition of. Amalgamation of man and of beast, meaning by this that she meant two different processes, one of people together and one of animals together. And this created confusion, and therefore God destroyed the earth by the flood. So this opinion, that of Dr. Marsh and that of Dr. Elder Nichol, is the prevalent, most favored opinion in Adventism, that it is not animals and human beings having sexual relationships together, but it is human beings and animals apart. The grammatical explanation is this one here by Elder Nichol. That's the favored interpretation traditionally in Adventism. But it does not solve all the answers. It does not provide all the answers. It does not solve all the questions and all the problems with this issue. The results Ellen White attributes to amalgamation were species of animals and races of men, but not any kind of amalgam of animals with human beings, it seems to say here. Since the flood, this amalgamation of men and beasts can be easily verified or seen because of so many species of animals and in certain races of men. Well, what did she mean by that? Certain races of men. Perhaps another question would be asked, well, which races of men are not part of that? And particularly in the context of racism in those years, it raises a lot of question here. What is she trying to say here? Not sure, because she never tried to explain what she was trying to say here regarding that. One thing is certain, though, is that Ellen White never considered the black race to be inferior to the white race, or the Asian race to be inferior to any other race. I think we need to be very clear on that point. Some people, white supremacists in particular, have used comments of this kind to say that races are superior one to another. And let's not use Ellen White in that direction, because that is never, never to be done. She is not going there at all. She's very clear in saying that all the races are equal in the eyes of God. But it still leaves problem with what she's trying to say here. Don't take my opinion to be the law or the best interpretation on this here, but I favor Dr. Clark's interpretation, that it was sexual relationship between animals and human beings. I prefer that one, and I'll tell you why. Any of you have the King James Version? Could you pull it out? And go to Leviticus. Oh my, I've got a blank all of a sudden. Leviticus 18 or 19. There is a passage in Leviticus 18 or 19 in the King James Version. You've got to have the King James Version, where God forbids a human being to sleep with an animal. Why? Because it causes confusion everywhere. Same expression that Ellen White is using in the first instance there. I don't know if any of you can pull it up and read it for us loud here. Try to find it. I don't have the verse by heart. It's chapter 18 or 19 in Leviticus, where it says, where it talks about sexual relationships and what God forbids. All right, could you go ahead and read it loud? 18:23.
Just after he condemns homosexuality, and he says, "Nor shall you make any animal, defile yourself with it, nor shall any woman stand before an animal and play with it. It is perversion.
It is
Do not defile yourself with any of these things, for by all these things the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you."
Do you have the King James? Oh, it has to be King James. It has to be the old King James. Go ahead.
It says, neither shalt thou lie with any beast to defile thyself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down thereto. It is confusion.
It is confusion. The word confusion is used here in that context. And we know that early Adventists were King James folks. And let's not get into that one. And so here God says sexual relationships with animals are forbidden. Why? Because it creates confusion. It is confusion. And Ellen White uses the same idea here in Spiritual Gifts. I tend to lean in that direction. Now, I don't have, the best answer here, but I tend to lean in that direction. That is what one reason why God would have destroyed the earth before the flood. But that causes problems when we come to the third sentence, since the flood. There has been amalgamation of man and beast, as can be seen in the almost endless varieties of animals and in certain races of man. All right, what do we do with this? We know genetically and heredity does not allow, it will not work. If a human being has sex with an animal, nothing will be born out of this. Certainly not an animal that is viable, that will continue to live, and certainly not a human being. It's impossible. It won't work. So the third sentence, where she separates animals and races of men, that sentence makes a whole lot more sense with a grammatical explanation. Human beings together, they form different races. Animals together form different species. So that's why I'm very confused. The first instance seems to lean toward the sexual thing. The third sentence seems to go toward the grammatical. Human beings together, animals together. So I've got to leave it up in the air. I'm not sure what to do with this. It's confusing to me. Confusing to a lot of people. But I do want to affirm that nobody should ever use these kinds of expressions from Ellen White to talk about racial relationships or a hierarchy of relationships between races. That is completely unfounded and not there, as we will see in one or two lectures here that we're going to have. Let me see if I have anything to say on my slides, then I'll take your comments there. No, let's stop there. So Greg, and then a couple of you there.
My first idea on it was, why are we sure that amalgamation is talking about sex?
Good point. That's right. That's a good point too.
I mean, genetic engineering
Is possible.
totally possible.
And we believe as Adventists that the pre-flood people were a whole lot smarter than we are today. Could they have done some kind of genetic engineering to cause some things to happen? And since the race of man right after the flood still had that intelligence and that potential, could they have done that too?
Well, my second idea on it was that she also talks about the Nephilim, or not she, the Bible talks about the Nephilim.
The Nephilims in chapter 6, Genesis 6.
Which, is an obvious, not in taking that these were angels having sex with men, but that these are the sons of God, or like you were saying, the holy mixing with the wicked.
Yes.
And creating giants.
Creating giants.
I mean, that's an evidence of two different classes of human coming together to create an unnatural class.
That's right.
Pre and post flood.
That's right. And could the same thing have been done with animals? All right, that's. I think this is what Ellen White is trying to address, this idea of the Nephilim in Genesis chapter 6. And she leaves us hanging here. It's not too clear what she's trying to say. Troy?
Not necessarily before the flood, but I'm thinking after the flood, also in her context with the history that's behind the text. This was a time when they were looking at race mixing and trying to determine what race of people was superior. I know we're not going there, but that was what was being talked about.
Yes.
Darwin's whole theory.
Oh, yes.
His whole thing is based on a superior race.
That's right.
The people that do the abortions, the Planned Parenthood, the lady who started that, you can read quotes from her. They talked about getting rid of a lower race, and that was just a whole movement during the early part of the 1800s. So I'm not saying that she was there, but that's an influence that's right around that.
Okay.
And then all you gotta do is click on the internet, and you'll see pictures of tigers and lions mixed together, and the mane and stripes and stuff. So they're still mixing animals right now.
They're still doing that, yes. Yes. Evelyn?
There are many times when they're combating different ideas that they think are wrong, that they use certain arguments which today we don't accept. The same thing is on the Trinity when they're fighting Unitarianism, spiritualism, and the Protestant conservative idea during the Advent movement of the Trinity. They came up with some ideas that today we can't swallow. And it seems here, might be a Christian scientific approach to counterbalance Darwinism at the time, where she might be saying something that scientifically is inaccurate, but Christian scientists of her day to fight that might have been using that
Okay.
argument. And I believe also the second thing is at this San Francisco 1947 conference, whether it was Arthur or Willie White that was there, they did ask him and one of her editors the opinion, and they said that what appears to be the more negative one is what she meant,
Which is?
which is that she was referring to beasts and animals mating.
Mating together.
Mating together is
Okay.
what they take.
I should look up that transcript. That should be interesting. Okay, well, let's move on. Jaime, I'll take Jaime, the last one.
I have a question about the dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs.
Were the dinosaurs a result of amalgamation?
Well, I'm not sure. Is that what she's trying to say? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I can't answer that, Jaime. Let me move on. Okay? Let's move on to another big one. Masturbation. This one makes people laugh, sneer, and so on. Ellen White did not employ the word masturbation in her writings. Though it was used in her generation, the word is listed in the Webster's Dictionary of her time. Instead, she used euphemisms like secret vice, self-abuse. She called it an evil and identified a number of undesirable physical, emotional, and spiritual ills that could result from this practice. In the 18th century, the concept of harm to the body brought on by masturbation came to the fore in the United States. A European doctor by the name of Dr. Tissot took up the cause against the practice and brought to America his theories, which included not only the harmfulness of masturbation, but also some sexual conducts between husbands and wives as well, which were declared to be harmful. The list of disorders following such sexual behaviors were said to cause problems all the way from acne to suicide. And parents were alerted to this proclaimed evil to every body system, to every parts of the body. Can you imagine here when a kid, that is a teenager, begins to have acne, which is natural for young men when the beard begins to grow and pimples and so on. Wow, that was quite a stigma. Much energy, time and money were spent on cures to put an end to masturbation. These consisted of various preventive measures, mechanical devices, and surgical procedures. Today we would really say that these things were abusive, quite abusive, to try to keep masturbation from happening. Here are the effects that are mentioned in her writings regarding what masturbation will cause. The physical effects include headaches, dizziness, nervousness, loss of appetite, and so on. Intellectual consequences include forgetfulness, inattention, brain deficiency. Emotional outcomes include apathy, gloom, sadness, jealousy, rebellion against authority. Spiritual consequences, death to spiritual matters, destruction of high resolve and earnest endeavor, and removal of oneself from holy influence. So quite a set here of conditions caused by this practice. We need to keep in mind, however, yes. Yes. Ellen White did not say, let's keep this in mind here. Ellen White did not say that all of the serious consequences she associated with masturbation would be visited upon any one given individual. So if somebody does this, that whole list of things will happen to that one person. Nor did she indicate that the worst possible scenario of any of these consequences would be experienced by any particular person. She didn't say that either. She just lists lots of things that could happen. What is she trying to say here? I think one cannot help but be impressed when reading an appeal to mothers and some passages in child guidance, or this chapter, a very long section in Testimonies to the Church, at how many times Ellen White uses the word mind as though much more were involved than purely the physical act. There are, I'm not a sex psychologist here, but there are various degrees of the practice of masturbation. We're all adults, so let's talk about it a little bit. You've got the young teenager who's discovering his body or discovering her body. The practice is just as prevalent today among females as it is among boys. So you've got the teenager who's discovering his or her body, and then you've got the other extreme, very other extreme, where you've got the obsessive-compulsive disorder, where the man, an adult, 30, 40, whatever the age may be, who does it 4 or 5 times a day. You got two extremes there. And then in between, you got everything in between. And but what is surprising to me, not surprising, but interesting to me, is that often in her discussion of masturbation, Ellen White talks about the mind. And I think that's where she's trying to get at. Most of the time, not all the times, but most of the time, masturbation is connected with fantasy, sexual fantasy. And that's a problem. That's a real problem. It's a moral problem. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, if you see a woman walking on the street and you begin to lust after her, it's as if you have committed adultery. So lusting, thinking, the mind being, focused on some sexual fantasies very often lead to masturbation. And Ellen White here, I think that's really what she's trying to get at. I think that's a whole lot more problem, I think, to me, than the physical practice itself. In fact, she was much more concerned about thought processes, attitudes, fantasies, as indicated in some of the parts of the quotes below here. The effects of such debasing habits upon the minds of all is not the same. Impure thoughts seize and control the imagination. The mind is to be stimulated in favor of the right. She says, let's not think about impure thoughts, but good thoughts. The mind takes pleasure in contemplating the scenes which awake base passions. I think that's what she's talking about. Really, really, really talking about. Not necessarily the physical act itself, which, is very similar to sexual intercourse between husband and wife. But the fact that masturbation is so closely connected with sexual fantasies. That's a sin, and that's a problem. It's connected with pornography also, very closely. And that's an issue. If we're going to raise the issue with Ellen White being old-fashioned, Victorian, about talking about the evils of masturbation, that's one thing. But I think that immediately we should do the jump and the link into what she says regarding fantasies. I think that's where the whole lot more of the problem is. And we should discuss that a whole lot more than we do just the physical act itself. So these are some thoughts that I'd like to leave with you. A lot of people make fun of Ellen White because she talks about the evil of masturbation. Let's talk about the evil of fantasies. I think we should go there a whole lot more. Bryant?
You said earlier that she never mentioned the word masturbation.
No, she does not mention the word masturbation. And some people are using that to say that she's not talking about masturbation.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask you. What are the phrases or the key terms that you use?
Self-abuse is the main one. And there, sometimes in the context, and there's a point there to be made. That's true. Thank you for raising that. There's a point to be made there. Some people say that sometimes the context is boys, juniors, early teens, who are discovering each other's bodies. And in that context, well, now that raises some flags too, some big flags. And so, that could be part of what she's trying to say. So some people are suggesting that that's what she's getting at. Not sure, though, that all the passages, because there are a lot of them, she's always talking about the discovery of 2 or 3 boys together, having some kind of homosexual relationship here, but it's not really homosexuality, it's discovery and the evils that come along with that. So, thank you for raising the point, though. It's a good point. As far as I know, the word is not used in her writings. Somebody could do a research there in the database, but I don't think the word may be used in editing. The editor may have added a comment which are usually in capital letters if you're using the Ellen White CD-ROM.
It's the subheadings and the brackets.
The subheading is in brackets, so it's not her words. It's the editor's words. Okay? So let me leave this as some thoughts with you. There are some issues, and I think we should get at some of those issues regarding fantasies and pornographies. I think those are very, very important, and they're a plague in society nowadays. There's a big plague there with that. Just to conclude, while medical science has not verified that the medical conditions attributed to masturbation through the years have any validity, there is agreement that obsessive masturbation, 2, 3, 4 times a day, is harmful, and that may point out also problems in the person involved which are not wholly physical. So there are some mental problems there, and some emotional problems. There's some compulsive problems, and that would be part of the issues there. So was Ellen White addressing some of those things? Likely. Many things that she was trying to address. One last problem statement I'd like to address with you has to do with England and the Civil War. In Testimonies, Volume 1, Ellen White relates a vision that she has had. Here she says, this nation, that's the United States, will yet be humbled into the dust. England is studying whether it is best to take advantage of the present weak condition of our nation and venture to make war upon her. A portion of the Queen's subjects are waiting a favorable opportunity to break their yoke. But if England thinks it will pay, she will not hesitate a moment to improve her opportunities to exercise her power and humble our nation. When England does declare war, all nations will have an interest of their own to serve, and there will be a general war and general confusion. Historians are saying, making fun of Ellen White here, that she was predicting that in the American Civil War, England would join the side of the South against the North to wage war and to try to regain supremacy in North America that she had lost at the American Revolution. Some people are saying that this is a false prophecy on the part of Ellen White. Curiously, though, recently some people have found some books have been written regarding the potential involvement of England during the American Civil War. And let me add one more to this list of a few books I give on the screen here. Any of you have seen the movie Gettysburg? All right, Gettysburg has a British lieutenant in uniform who is mingling with the Southern forces and the generals from the South, and they're wondering, and he's wondering, see how the war is going. And very clearly in the movie it is said that England is studying whether it should join the war on the side of the South against the North. So even a modern film like Gettysburg supports the idea. Ellen White was not far out. Not a false prophecy. Just it didn't happen. But she was right in saying that England was studying whether it should join the war. I think that's it for today. Any questions?
Not necessarily about what you talked about, but this class in general.
Okay.
This is the first time I used the lecture notes about the law,
Yes?
and I noticed these notes from like 1990 something.
Yeah, these are Dr. Kuhn's notes.
You said you added some things with slides and stuff like that.
Yes.
Is there a way you can kind of,
Add to the notes too?
well, maybe just make it put your slide presentation outline form, or something like, I don't know.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes a longer time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is true. Through the years I have updated the PowerPoint more than I have updated the lecture notes. So it's a little easier for me to do the PowerPoint, and that's the medium I use a whole lot more too. Thank you though. Greg and then Kyle.
The last quote there, she had a sentence that said, when England declares war on the nation, they'll have to fend for themselves.
Yes.
That seems to point more towards an actual prediction.
It's an actual prediction, but it's in the context of England is studying whether, and then when it does. then there will be confusion everywhere. Other countries will join the melee and just there will be general war. So it's not, that sentence that England, when she declares war, that sentence cannot be taken alone. The whole context says that there is a context here. And England has not decided yet. It is studying whether it does.
So it's almost more like if that.
It's a conditional, very true, it's a conditional prophecy. Yeah. Kyle?
Yeah, I just was wondering, in your personal estimation of all this, these are things some of us have heard many times before, and I think they can serve to be little parasites on your faith, if you will, at times, if you focus on it. And so, because there's a lot of questions that are raised by sometimes these statements that move, and you often say, hey, there's some things that we just can't get around. We don't understand why she said this. And you also said that, we're not going to try to judge whether or not this was inspired at this point. My question is, how do you deal with it on a personal level in terms of your faith in what she's saying? Because, while we can't say this wasn't inspired, this was, that still plays into it, It's still very much a real issue. And so I'm just wondering something a little bit to,
Thank you. Good question. How do I deal with that on a faith perspective? Because these are, as you said, good illustration here, little parasites that keep nabbing, and nibbling at one's faith. There are some things in Scripture I don't understand. There are some passages of Scripture that tend to be a little obscure and a little complicated. And if I were to, concentrate and spend a lot of thinking about these passages, maybe that would lead me in some other directions than the ones I have chosen. Same thing with the writings of Ellen White. Some of these passages I don't have an answer for. But to me, I simply put them on some kind of an intellectual shelf inside of my mind. I don't discard it, I don't throw it away, but I put it on the shelf and I say to myself, maybe one day I'll find something that will help me figure this out. Maybe there will be a historical note in some context somewhere that will appear, that will, enlighten me. That's what happened to me with the amalgamation thing there. When I read that passage in the King James Version, Leviticus 18:23, well, all of a sudden, number one explanation seems to be a little more making sense here. But that does not explain everything, so I'm still a little lost with that explanation. Maybe something will come along one day. There are things in Scripture, to come back to that I just don't understand. But that does not destroy my faith in Jesus, or in the church, or in the message, the beautiful message in which we believe. There will always be a few doubts that I can hang on to if I want to. So I use faith and I use reason and I try to balance the two together. I do my best. There are enough evidences for my faith to hang on to the overall picture of Ellen White as a messenger of the Lord. There is so much of it. And so I hang on to those. On the other hand, I recognize that she was a human being. And the way she expressed herself was very human. And sometimes may not make sense to me 90 years after she's died. That's how I try to explain it. I keep faith regardless. Debbie?
On the statements that you did not try to go over, do we have explanations for them?
Yeah, there are a few statements that I did not go over with you here. Movable tumor, the wet nurse, a few others. The cheese, 1, 2, that's right. The text document of this lecture has those sections. And it has some plausible explanation that Dr. Roger Kuhn provides. Now, I have not updated those with the latest finds in Newsweek and Time Magazine and things like this that I find sometimes. I have not updated those in the last few years, but there's some ideas there. The White Estate also has files on all of those that you can go to and find a little more. So, Wayne?
I
Yes?
Particularly because there are ministries around our denomination specifically that talk about the apostasy of the Adventist church, primarily because
Of eating cheese.
their God.
Well, you know, there's a problem with cheese. You know what it is? It tastes good.
And it's bad for you.
And if you get to be my age, late 40s, early 50s, the doctors begin to tell you or to tell me, stay away from some things that are high in fat, cholesterol, and things like this. Why? Well, you know, it's because our bodies age, and there comes a time where cholesterol becomes to be a problem. The heart health is important, and on and on and on. And so, you know, cheese, the problem with cheese is that it tastes good. And a good pizza is just wonderful. All right? Okay? All right? But now, honestly speaking, what is good about cheese?
Tastes good.
Apart from the taste. Well, yeah. Yeah. Calcium. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, stay with me. Stay with me here. There is, of course, there's calcium, there's protein, but there's so much saturated fat
Not good for you.
that is not good for you. Okay, apart from that, really apart from that, the context of Ellen White's time when cheese was made, it was not pasteurized, so all the bacteria of milk were left in the cheese. It was not well preserved, no fridge, no freezers, and so on. So it aged a whole lot faster. It degenerated a whole lot faster, and it was full of fat. And it seemed to be molding faster than anything else did. So it was a health concern. For sure, it was a health concern. Now, at the turn of the century, pasteurization processes began, and so the cheese began to be a whole lot more healthier, if we can say it that way, because it was better preserved. But it still is today a health concern. Cheese is not necessarily the best for us. I think we know enough about nutrition to agree with that. So it's one of those things that really needs to be taken in moderation, and we need to be careful with it. Now, I know that that kind of an answer is not plausible for those who are saying not a gram of it. You know, it's not to be tasted or touched at all. But there's a context there in Ellen White's time that needs to be taken into account. So, preservation in particular.
My curiosity is just, I just heard this conversation again. You know, I heard it while I was at Oakwood, but I heard it just again on the other day about it is one of the clear indications that we, like Israel, have left from our early foundation because we are now consuming dairy products.
There is, look, come on. There is the use. It's true. Ellen White does mention in her writings the time will come when we need to give up meat and dairy products, but that is not the center of our faith. That is not the basis of Adventism. It's not the basis of our writings at all. It is one aspect of the health reform that consciously we need to go in that direction. But that is not it. That is a little part of it, yes, but that is not it. It's a whole lot more, and it's a whole lot other things than that.